Well, welcome everyone. Just to honor people's time, we're gonna get started. So welcome to our second roundtable. This is some community roundtables that are being hosted by the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force. And this task force was brought together by the city of Richmond, along with the help of the city council members who selected the people who sit on the task force. And just as a FYI, this meeting is being recorded and the chat is also going to be recorded. So definitely visit the City of Richmond's website. We have a Reimagine Public Safety page, and there you can find all of the presentations and resources along with the chat. The city is trying to respond to the chat questions and things, so it's a great follow-up to see if any of your questions were answered there. Um, and then I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Tania Pulido. I grew up in the flats of Richmond and San Pablo and a Richmond resident. I've been involved with community work for the past 11 years and started off doing like urban gardening, worked at the Rise Youth Center, have written for the Richmond Post. And the past a year and a half, I've shifted gears in my career, and now I work in affordable housing development. So I work for Community Housing Development Corporation in North Richmond, and we focus on the development of affordable housing in Richmond and other Bay Area communities. And so we go from like pre-development all the way to closing. So that's some of the knowledge that I bring to the table, and excited to be here with all of y'all, and just really thankful for this space so that we can begin to talk about this important issue in our community. And I will pass it on to Luis to introduce himself. Me and Luis are the co-facilitators for tonight.
Cool, thank you, Tanya. Yeah, like Tanya said, my name is Luis Chacon. I'm a local high school teacher in the area, but also been living in the area since the age of 13, graduated from Richmond High School. And overall, I've been teaching for the last 10 or so years, and then just been back in Richmond for the last 4 or 5 years. So a lot of my work is revolved around working with young folks and students in particular. And obviously, as far as the issue of unhoused and unsheltered folks, I come with the perspective of how it can impact our students and students' families in the area. So thank you all for being here. I'll briefly pass it to Marisol. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. I know you're doing more of the technical kind of support today, but if you want to say a couple words, and you are muted.
Hi, my name is Marisol Cantu, and I'll be the newest member of the task force. And I'll just be helping with the technical side of this. So when we do open it up for public discussion, I'll be announcing people's names by 3 so we can keep everyone together and on the same page. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. So moving it right along here, and we're gonna go a little speedy at times just in the interest of time. But our general agenda for today looks as so. And just to remind you all, right, of our intention in holding this space today, I think the first thing I would humbly like to do is just acknowledge that, in Richmond, San Pablo, we are on Ohlone territory, and it is important to recognize that. And coming from that legacy in this area, it will be important to really channel that communal energy and really respect and move forward with dignity as a community, right? So that's what we hope to do today. So in general, right, in brief moment, we'll go over some agreements, we'll go over our framework for today, going over kind of where the issue is currently and some of the efforts
So I
that
just want to let you know that you have a sexy haircut, my God.
and then just a reminder, if y'all could mute yourselves,
Oh,
that would be amazing.
oh my God, bro, that turned.
So we are gonna be going over some current efforts, and then as well as possible solutions and ongoing solutions that are being implemented at the moment. And then we will go over ways to get involved and close it out with having a community conversation. And it will be important to just acknowledge that the conversation is something that's been ongoing and something that will continue after this space, right? So we do want to acknowledge that that today's space is part of a larger effort that has been taking place and will continue to take place thereafter. So in terms of agreements for the space, we do ask folks to, well, we do want to remind you that it is a public space. That being said, though, we also want to ask you to come from a place of respect, as far as, respect for each other, and keep things civil. This is a topic that can arise some particular opinions and feelings, but we do have to remember that the goal here, right, is to really figure out the best way to address this. So that being said, we are asking you to mute yourselves if you are not speaking. So it seems like there might be some issues around that. So if you need support in muting yourself, please let us know and we can guide you to the appropriate way to do that. We do ask that you raise your hand to speak. If the raise hand feature is not available, then we will ask you to turn on your camera and physically raise your hand. And then just be present. We are here for about an hour and a half, but we do ask you to actively engage and listen. That being said, the chat is a feature of Zoom, but it is not something that we will be necessarily acknowledging throughout the presentation. Like Tanya said, the chat comments are going to be recorded, and we will do our best to get back to folks if any questions or comments in particular come up in the chat. And that being said, Tanya, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Yeah, so our next slide starts with our framework. This is just something that we want to hold as we move into the conversation. And of course, during the community, at the end, during the community conversation, we can expand on this, but this is just some key points we wanted to highlight right now. The first one being that, what's bringing us all together is home, and Richmond is home, right? And we in the flyer says homelessness, and it sometimes implies that those people don't have a home, but we just wanted to really acknowledge that Richmond is home and that we are all neighbors, and that people, and that's what basically like brings us together, right? So unsheltered, unhoused, housed, we're all neighbors and we need to work together to improve our neighborhoods.
And then with the second point, we also want to acknowledge that being unsheltered and unhoused is not a crime. Just like it's come up at other spaces, we do acknowledge that a big reason, or there are several big reasons why folks are encountering the situation that they are, right? Being unsheltered or unhoused. It is important to acknowledge that a lot of times it's from very deep-rooted racist, classist, and sexist issues that have been ongoing for generations, and is just impacting folks in a particular way. So we definitely want to avoid taking a criminalization approach.
Mm-hmm. And then our last point is, housing is a right. Everyone deserves to live with dignity and respect. We are in a housing crisis, and we will be talking about that. And so, yeah, just highlighting that housing is a right. It's a basic necessity for all of us, and so that's the ultimate goal, right? It's housing everyone in Richmond. Perfect. So now we're gonna move on to the current issues, and Michelle Milam will be joining us. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us and talking about talking in the next following slides.
Thank you so much to Tanya, Luis, and Marisol for helping to put this together and for everybody who's here. My name is Michelle Milam. I work with the City of Richmond, and I'm a staff member assigned to the city's homeless task force. And so I'm going to be talking a couple of slides just briefly about where we are with dealing with this issue of people not having access to housing, which is really a fundamental and basic right within the city. And as many of you know, I mean, we've always had a housing crisis, especially here in the Bay Area with the high cost of housing. But we really are experiencing a shelter crisis right now that has been worsened with the pandemic. And I don't know if you all are aware of this, but both when the pandemic started, Brookside,
I have ALS.
I think somebody might be unmuted, but Brookside Shelter, because it was congregate living, was closed down, as well as the Richmond or the Bay Area Rescue Mission, because they have congregate living where people would be living in close quarters, be likely to contract COVID-19. So that definitely has worsened our crisis. The other thing that happened is initially when the pandemic hit, the state put a lot of funding into opening up hotels to be able to support some of these efforts that we have going on and moving people into hotels, but those quickly filled. And so at present, those are at 98, 99% capacity. So we do have a shelter crisis during this pandemic that we're dealing with. And as Tanya mentioned, and Luis,
you living in a hotel for?
As I mentioned, we want to try to avoid criminalization of people. And we want to be able to avoid people kind of going into the criminal justice system for doing things like trying to find shelter for themselves. A lot of times the police are called out because neighbors are concerned about things that are happening in the neighborhood. And so the strategy the city has taken is trying to get services first and also balance that with some of the safety needs. A little bit about, I talked about the high rates of rent and the high cost of living that's here that's impacting folks who are unsheltered, but also want to talk about some equity issues because we do get data that's taken from the point in time count, which you guys will see in a few minutes. But there's also a piece that deals with equity that's really important is that we see more unsheltered people who unfortunately are Black and brown folks, particularly with in our encampments and our unsheltered with African-American men. And so that's a high point to take a consideration of when we're thinking about equity and why people might find themselves in a situation where they are unsheltered and experiencing that. We also have been seeing a rise in first-time homelessness and folks who are just going into the system that's already stretched to capacity, in large part.
Louise, I like your guitar.
In large part because of the pandemic, probably because some people are having to now repay at least 25% of their rent, and that can be very difficult for people. So you find more and more people living in their cars and vehicles. One of the biggest issues is funding. Obviously, there is a system of funding that goes through the county. Richmond is not like Oakland and other big cities where we get large pots of money from the state. We actually share that pot of funding with the county. And so we have to work together with the county on strategies that we want to see happen to get funding that is shared to implement programs and program strategies. And another big thing that we have faced is NIMBYism, is that a lot of times residents will be sympathetic to the plight of those who are unsheltered, but they really are concerned when things and projects come into their neighborhood and are concerned about blight and crime, and it leads us to not necessarily having enough support. Next slide. And I'm gonna go over this quickly. I don't think I need the full time for this, but if you take a look at your slide here, these are the 2020 point in time count data counts by city. This is actually a count that HUD requires us to do in various years to determine funding. And so this is the last count that was taken in 2018 when the city of Richmond declared a shelter crisis. And as you can see, the city of Richmond had approximately 280 folks who were unhoused at that point in time. More recent data, we have a core homeless outreach team that we fund both through the city, and the county has a team. And I actually have the numbers from March of last year to January of this year for our Richmond San Pablo core team and the Richmond team specifically. And they made contact with a large percentage of our unhoused and unsheltered population of 989. And then the total contacts that they made for the West County teams were 3,952 contacts in terms of being unduplicated, which means they didn't count one person more than once. Those are almost 1,000 contacts. So the numbers are probably a lot higher than what we're seeing because people are kind of transitory. Next slide. We talked about equity and a high percentage of African American males being impacted by homelessness that are unsheltered, which means you lived in a place not fit for habitation in terms of the questioning that we do to kind of determine an unsheltered status. But a lot of inequity issues are because we have lack of access to services like mental health and alcohol and drug treatment services. One of the things that I found interesting when I was looking at some of the data that we looked at for CORE is that we have a high percentage of people who are disabled. And disabled can actually be chronic health conditions. It could be alcohol and drug abuse. It could be mental health. It could be physical. And it's important to point out is that in the last year, we had 467 people who were contacted who had a mental health problem, who were unsheltered in the city of Richmond by the CORE team. And we also had 389 people who had physical disabilities. So we're dealing with folks who need access to services that are really important for them to be able to gain. And we also have a high percentage of people who are elderly, unfortunately, who have lived in homelessness a long time and who are aging and don't have the support that they need to be able to be sheltered with rising concerns about their health and their health conditions. Next slide. So this slide just kind of shows you an idea about where people are finding their shelter. And I think this is from the 2020 point in time data, really important to take a look at. If you take a look at it, we have a significant people who are either in their number of people who are in their cars or vans or RVs who are living on public streets in their vehicles to be sheltered. We have another significant portion of folks who are living on the street or the sidewalk, and you see a great percentage, 34%, that are in a tent or makeshift shelter. So what this really indicates is that while the need for shelter is rising, the lack of shelter is not enough to be able to meet the available demand that we need to be able to serve everyone. And so as we develop strategies, we really want to take a look at that. Next slide. So there's 3 points of entry through the Contra Costa County system of care, which the county has a system of care where both county services and nonprofit services work together and collaborate so that when people come into the system, they have a way to be able to connect with various services. If someone needs some help, one of the things that you can do is you can contact the CORE homeless outreach team, and you can contact them through 211. You can call, they do have a dispatch center, and it's not 24-hour answered dispatch, but if you call and you leave a message, they will get back and try to make contact with the individual who needs help or services. And we do have CORE teams that are available to be able to go out and make contact with people and kind of doing a needs assessment to see what kind of services they can offer them. And that's for really anyone who's literally at risk or homeless. And then there's care. So there's care centers throughout the county, which are kind of daytime drop-in centers where people can go in and kind of get some additional services and flyers. I think some of that is being dropped in the chat as well by Jamie, if you all want to take a look at those resources. And there are some care centers that are available in Richmond and Walnut Creek throughout the county where people can come and get services, but obviously we need more. We used to have a warming center at GRIP where people could stay from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and just have a safe place to sleep. But obviously when the pandemic hit, that service was no longer available. So there obviously are really serious gaps in some of the services that we're trying to offer, but we want people to know about it. And then there's CORE, which I talked about, which is really kind of a mobile crisis system that goes out and offers people services. The nice thing about CORE is that CORE it doesn't need to be a police service. CORE is able to come out and provide those services, and PD doesn't have to come out to provide those services to people. So it really is an important piece of that system. They can do housing navigation, they can find out what resources are available, they can provide healthcare access, help to connection with mental health. The only thing the CORE really can't do right now in this pandemic is change the amount of sheltering options that we have. So that is really our responsibility as a city, a county, and as a region, as community, is to be able to provide more shelter to people who are in crisis. Because as you keep on doing outreach, you want to be able to connect people with more sustainable permanent housing options. Next slide. And I believe this is my last slide. So I'm going to just kind of go over very briefly some of the services that the City of Richmond and the Homeless Task Force has really kind of considered over the last couple of years to be able to address some of these things. So the city, first of all, did establish a homeless task force in 2017 and 18. And that task force was tasked with coming up with some recommendations for City Council. And those recommendations that were made to increase the number of mobile services that we provide to those who are unhoused. And so we were able to, with the city, kind of expand the core services. And the first thing that we did is actually expand that core contract. So it is an annual contract that we do with Contra Costa County to offer an additional core team to service Richmond, because we recognize, looking at those numbers in that previous slide, that we obviously have a greater need for those mobile services. And also we want to make sure services go to where people are. We shouldn't expect people who are already having transportation and housing issues to go to all these different places to receive services. We really want to have services be streamlined and come to them. That's a better model to be able to engage people. The other thing we supported is we've been supportive of SOS. We were able to provide some small funding from the city for the services that they do. I know that they're going to be presenting next, so I don't want to take away from their thunder, but they do a lot of great work on organizing, developing street teams, and they focus on an empowerment model that really helps people within the system, be able to get some access to those kinds of quality of life issues that we need around encampments. So I will let Daniel speak to that, which he's going to do in a few minutes. The other thing that we need to concern ourselves with as a reason is being able to expand shelter capacity. That's a huge issue, because when we don't have enough places to send people, it's really a terrible predicament to come and have the police have to come in at the last, part of that and see somebody who's in crisis and not really be able to offer them any services. And then it becomes a criminalization issue because a neighbor is called and complained, this car is parked here and I don't want it here. So part of that is being able to provide those services to people. We have families who are living in their cars. We have moms, we have grandmas, we have all kinds of people who are struggling, living in tents and not really having a place to go. So it's our job as a region to really look at how can we coordinate more with the state and the county to receive more funding for that. Emergency sheltering and safe parking program. So the safe parking program is a very important piece of what the Homeless Task Force recommended. And it really is a program that's designed to be able to service people and provide them a safe place to park that has case management services, food, showers, shelter, portable potties, access to wraparound services for a longer period of time. We know there's a lot of people who are parked on the street and don't really have a safe place to park, or they're parked in neighborhoods where they're not getting the sanitation and other things. And there's a public health issue and there's a quality of life issue for folks who are living there, who need a safe space to go where they know that they won't, have any issues with, the public or law enforcement, and they'll be able to get the services they need. So the city has been working to try to establish that and has put in $300,000 of in lieu fees that were allocated for that particular project, and $260,000 of HEAP funding that's coming from the county to support it. Right now, the city council is vigorously debating this and vigorously debating where it should be housed, but they have voted on the strategy. And hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will know where our safe parking program will be, that will be able to shelter anywhere between 20 and 35 individuals for a year-long pilot project. Tiny homes on wheels ordinance, the city does have, we always get asked about tiny homes, does have a tiny homes on wheels ordinance that's set to expire in July. And what it permits right now is a pilot project for 6 potential tiny homes on wheels. We have a student group that's called Themby. I don't think they're on the call today, but they would be a great group to connect with that has been working to try to build some of these. And recently there was a meeting convened with Councilmember McLaughlin and some of the community partners and employment and training to see if there's a way to connect Youth Build Richmond with some of the Themby students so that we could demo some of these tiny homes on wheels projects in Richmond and see if we could get potential more funding for them. So that is another thing that the city's been looking at. And then also looking at longer term options for very low income housing like Hacienda Project and Terrace. So when the city starts building these units, are we making sure that there's enough units available for people who are transitioning from being unsheltered so that we can get people into some place that's safe and get them into their very own home with the keys where they have some stability and ability to do what we all need to do is have a roof over our heads to sustain ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, who's going to talk about a really exciting effort, Safe Organized Spaces.
Hi there.
Hi, Daniel.
Yes.
Before you start, I just would like to acknowledge to everyone and say thank you for your patience with some of the Zoom bombing we've been experiencing this evening. So thank you all for being patient with that. But I will let you know that once that started, we've stopped allowing anyone in as part of the panelist conversation. So that may affect the way we are calling on people during the conversation because there will be hands on 2 separate sides now. So I just would like to acknowledge that and let folks know. And thank you again for your patience. And we really appreciate you all being here and being open. Thank you. Okay, Daniel, take it away.
Okay, sorry, I was getting my unmuted. So I'm Daniel. Hopefully you can see me. Here I am representing SOS Richmond Safe Organized Spaces. The idea is that obviously we have objectives of creating safety and creating organization. The safety is about the stability that people need rather than being in encampments that are incredibly unstable and tenuous and precarious. And so safety in and of itself, safety of violation of body, safety from a violation of property, burning of your makeshift structure. And so organization is necessary. Order needs to be created in environments that are unsheltered. And can we increase the order, the human organization and the physical organization that brings in the amenities to improve the conditions that people are living in, and then creating a sense of place. Obviously, having space is an essential need. We all have the desire, the need to have a place to call home. And so when Luis talks about how we need to be treating all of each other as neighbors, Tanya said as well, we're seeing each other as neighbors, housed and unhoused, working together, trying to change the conditions and address the issues of homelessness. That's why we're here today. We know the problem is really bad out there. It's gotten worse and will continue to get worse. And so if we make some demonstrative steps forward, it's to increase safety, to increase organization, and to find safe places for people to be. And that's in lieu of having the housing that so many people are lacking. It's amazing that this county has, thankfully to the state, and the opportunity that COVID provided really to give more attention to people who are unsheltered, that we've been able to house folks as part of Project Room Key. And that's been an amazing resource. I can show testimony about that with staff who are in that project. One of my folks just today got a jury duty notice, and he says, look at me, 26 years in prison, and now I'm the one being called for jury duty the same day that I got my DMV registration. We're talking about progress that individuals can make because we put them in the driver's seat. Someone should be sitting here doing this presentation who has the neighborhood knowledge, who has the cultural competency, who has the relationships to work with each other, to work with the peers, to create a peer system of strength so that they're sitting here instead of me doing this work as leaders. We want to empower that leadership. And there's three main ways to do that. If the objectives are safety and organization and space and a place to be, then we definitely want to be creating managed encampments. The point being is that our unsupported encampments are unsafe and untenable. We have evictions even during the shelter in place. We have the bulldozers coming in because of the health, as Michelle was saying, the public health concerns that end up and the physical concerns that come from having to live in an environment that does not have the basic amenities, does not have power, that does not have sanitation and so forth. And so what can we do in a managed encampment environment? And what we basically need to do is to provide water in situations where drinking and washing water is not available. We need to have sanitation services for human waste and for our debris, our trash. And we need to also provide for hygiene services. And so SOS responds to those basic amenity needs by providing some basic services, which we'll talk about in a second. Those managed encampments also need to create a leadership base, folks taking charge to act as the leaders for security that and for the handling the basic conditions of public health, and so that we can get individuals to rise, to bring people together in the encampments and create a system of organization. And so creating that sense of management is something that needs to be facilitated, and then the empowerment process happens. And so that's what I believe to be a managed encampment. And a step forward, of course, from that is to then create what we're about to be doing in the city of Richmond, which is a transitional villages. And the difference, of course, is that we have a support system in place, including case management, with a management entity running the environment, and yet having the empowerment aspects essentially as an essential part of that organization. That if folks need to feel part of and a place of home, feeling like they have a stakeholdership. And that's why it's really important that in that transitional housing environment, we're creating not only the supportive services, but that sense of security that they work with each other. And so, and then there's a third strategy that I would like to propose, and that is an arrangement where if folks are not going into those transitional villages, and if we want to move folks out of those managed encampments that are at curbside and on our freeways and on our creeks and on our train tracks, even if they're managed, they're unsafe still. And so we need to create some other arrangement. And hopefully Valerie is going to be talking about how we're using tiny homes and sleeping cabins to create the alternatives. One alternative could be is that we utilize scattered sites, churches, and nonprofits with their parking lots, so that we can site one or two or several households living on a property on a temporary basis, on a month-to-month, so that we can have folks off the street and into a safer situation. So that's the concept. And so what SOS Richmond has done thus far is hired homeless folks to do the streets teamwork, to run shower power, and to start to build that managed encampment scenario that gets us to transitional housing. And I can go into more detail if there is more time, and I can also let it go at that point. You can let me know.
Yeah, we're actually we're over time. So if you want to start to
Sure.
close out. Thank you, Daniel. Do you want to talk a little bit about ways to contact you?
For sure. So you can call me, you can use my email address. The goal here is that this is a community organizing network, and that means you and me and all of us together are going to make this happen. So if you join us, you are part of SOS Richmond. SOS Richmond being that network. You can see us on Facebook under SOS Richmond, and soon we'll have a really good website up, and we'll become a 501c3. But for now, there's my phone number and my email address.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. We really appreciate it. We also included the Daniel's Venmo account, or SOS Richmond Venmo account. So, if you can spare some money and donate, it always goes to great resources for solutions happening right now on the ground. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide, which Valerie Jamison from Richmond Land is going to present. They're doing amazing work in Richmond. And, the solution to homelessness is housing, permanent housing. And that's like the end goal. So Valerie's going to tell us more about what Richmond Land is doing. The first bullet point is just what Michelle already mentioned, right? There's affordable housing projects. Hacienda hopefully will start construction this year. So that would be senior housing, affordable senior housing, and there's other projects in the Richmond pipeline. And then Valerie will share more about Richmond Land's work. So Valerie, if you're here.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Tanya. I really appreciate it. Hey folks, I do want to keep my piece brief because I recognize there's a wealth of knowledge and perspective in the chat, and so many of us are moving this work constantly. For my piece of the presentation, I think it's more about presenting a perspective that I think is really important. As Tanya mentioned, I'm the founding director of Richmond Land, and our mission as an organization is to build resident power for community-controlled land use, and so that really includes the community organizing piece that Daniel spoke so eloquently about, looking at land use in terms of land acquisition so that we can have the development models that really work for our community, seeded by community residents for long-term affordability, which I know is the bulk of what I want to talk about here. And the perspective I want to offer is really recognizing that also, we need affordable housing, and the affordable housing system is broken. And there are several challenges to being able to house people in a dignified way, in a secure way, because there are not enough housing types that are allowed to come into existence because of land use regulations, because of zoning challenges. And so some of those models have already been spoken about. Tiny home models where, tiny micro units, whether it's on wheels or on foundations. I know some of what we're exploring are accessory dwelling units, which is the first bullet. And it's really recognizing that we do need to add density. And of course, adding density is not just about going from single family homes and then having, high rises that are all rental units or rental properties, but there are a lot of alternative infill development projects that can foster social cohesion, that can build connection and increase affordable housing stock. And so that's one area of work that those are the projects that local residents themselves see as viable solutions. And we have to find ways to honor that. And sometimes it's about setting our intention for projects and then going through the motions, like the advocacy is very much needed. The organizing to chart a path forward for those type of projects to become a reality. And I will acknowledge the residents we're working with, of course, are marginally housed, but not as deeply impacted as those that Daniel's working with. Like he's really in the paint, working with folks who are in the houseless population and community. But that idea of wanting and needing to work with most impacted residents is really critical. And I think just to touch on some of the constraints that oftentimes challenge our ability to move forward in rapidly housing folks, has already been stated. It's this concept of NIMBYism, and it's really recognizing and calling out who feels the most entitled to make decisions around people's safety. Housing is a human right. It's a public health need, especially during this time, as already been stated. We really need to take a hold of this moment and recognize that models like the transitional villages were needed prior to the pandemic, have been championed by the homeless task force for some time. And now given our public health crisis and given kind of a lot of economic uncertainty that is being felt now and will continue to be felt, we need to act with a lot more urgency in terms of making these projects a reality, whether it is passing, we have a sample ordinance that is enabling pilot projects to happen, but we need to be including Richmond as, you know, a part of Contra Costa in some emergency ordinances to be able to help facilitate the development of essentially affordable tiny home villages, similar to what we're seeing in Oakland. There's great models in San Jose. Habitat for Humanity is creating these different opportunities because there's legislation that enables it. In many ways, we need to look at local and regional legislation to support that. So that's where the advocacy is really important. The reason why I put so much of our contact information in the chat, I know I have limited time, is our organization was really big on being a part of the Contra Costa Budget Justice Coalition and advocating at the county level, which Michelle already spoke to, where a lot of the funding and resources are currently held, to essentially say we need to be more creative with our COVID dollars and thinking about how we're using those funds, those additional resources that have come down from stimulus packages, to say we need to be housing people rapidly and we need to bypass, there's wonderful outcomes from the existing room key model. And so now how are we using home key dollars to think about land acquisition for long-term projects and for long-term benefits, and whether that's supportive housing models, whether it's alternative infill models, we need to be creating multiple solutions and a variety of housing tenure across the board, so that it's not, because there's so many barriers to single family, to traditional home ownership. And I know I don't have the time to talk about the details of the community land trust model in particular, but it's all about how are we creating opportunities to close the gap in people's ability to be to have that stable housing, where they're not being a renter. Although we have great protections here in Richmond, there's a lot that is out of your control because you are, beholden to the rules and expectations and shifts that a landlord can provide. And so the community land trust model is one that's moving towards shared equity and an opportunity for people to have the ability to close the gap between who becomes a homeowner, how we can look at models like limited equity, housing cooperatives as a way to help facilitate people into that secure, long-term and long tenured housing. I'll stop there because I know there's more we can get into in the Q&A, but appreciate the time.
Thank you, Valerie. And yeah, I highly recommend people to check out Richmond Land. They have community meetings and info sessions, and there's lots of ways to get involved. And yeah, thank you, Valerie, for joining us tonight. And now we can move on to our next slide. We're almost done, yeah.
So in terms of just to uplift, Valerie did put her contact info in the chat, or the contact info for Richmond Land, rather. So please make sure you check that out. In addition to that, just other ways to get involved in some of the issues are displayed on the screen. So we encourage y'all to take a screenshot, but there is a rent board that meets every third Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And there are open vacancies on the rent board. We don't have a list ready of what those are right now, but if you are interested in that, you can reach out and then we can definitely plug you into with that information. There is a homeless task force that meets the last Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. and you can contact Michelle Milam for that, and her email address is on the screen. In addition to that, just some other organizations that are active in the housing, amongst housing issues is ACE, and their phone number and website's listed on there, and then as well as Legal Aid, their website and phone number is listed there for y'all as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, as Luis mentioned, it's really important to continue the work, right? It doesn't stop. It didn't start today and it's not gonna stop today, and it continues in all these different groups. And so with that said, we'll move on to the last slide, which is the community discussion. So I'm gonna just say a couple of things and then we'll just open it up. So Marisol is going to be helping with the speaker stack. So please listen to the how she calls on people. She'll be calling 3 people at a time, and just being mindful of your time and how much space you're taking up, and just acknowledging, that not all the questions are going to be answered, but that we're going to work to do follow-ups, and we're going to include those on the website. And we also know that there's been a lot of, we just want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of conversations around the safe parking program for the city of Richmond, and just acknowledging that, you know, there are going to be follow-up meetings around that at City Council and the Homeless Task Force. And not to say we can't talk about it now, but we definitely want to allow for a diverse dialogue amongst all of us, since we all came here, because I'm sure we have ideas and thoughts around what we can do. And yeah, I just want to remind people of the shared agreements around one mic and respect and muting yourself if you're not speaking. And I do want to start off the community discussion with a community champion, Ms. Dandy. She's been doing a lot of great work in helping Richmond residents. And yeah, she's volunteered in multiple groups. So I definitely want to give Ms. Dandy the floor right now to share about her work that she does in Richmond. And then from then on, you can just raise your hand, and Marisol will start taking a speaker stack.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How many minutes you gonna give me?
Well, we definitely, you know, we'll just, you could go.
Don't do that, you know, I talk a lot.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of people. Just keep in mind that we want everyone to.
Okay, so I'm gonna give myself a few minutes. I'm gonna time myself, but I'm gonna ask everyone to do something really, really, really quick for me. There's 22 people on here, but if every person on here can turn off their video, turn it off. I don't want anybody's video. I don't want to see your face. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see your expression. I want everyone to be blank. That includes you too, Tanya. I'm even going to turn off mine. Let me go over here. Is everyone's video off? Not your mute. Well, if that does, the mute goes off with your video?
Everyone should be muted.
No, I don't want them to be muted. I want them to hear. I don't want, muted to not speak.
Yeah, they shouldn't
Okay.
be able to. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do this real quick. Imagine yourself as a young kid and you live with your mother. She makes $15 an hour. That's 40 hours a week, $600. $1,200 every 2 weeks, $2,400 a month. That's $28,800 a year. She's trying to move somewhere. You have to come up with a deposit, the first, the last, a credit check. Don't forget that you might have to come up with 3 or 4 times your rent, which equals about $9,600 a month. And if you give or take, you have to make about $86,000 a year up to $115,000 a year. Now, if anyone on here actually makes that much, then you need to be helping me. But imagine your mother being on welfare and she just has 1 child. She gets approximately $450 to $576 and $200-300 in food stamps. As we sit here and discuss how much everyone knows that homeless is an issue, think about those that are in homes trying to make it. I work with homeless, I work in home, I work with everyone. The problem that we're having is that no one wants to say the real problem. Understandably, we have services, but they're not all in the same place. They're not accessible as everyone says that they are. They're not equally divided as people want to say the positive word that they are. We have children running away. We have a child missing. We have 16-year-olds right now that are pregnant and have children. They have nowhere to go. We have shelters. We have places for them to be. We have places that they need to be, but they can't get in because they're unaccompanied minors. We have food banks that they can give food to, but if you don't have a refrigerator, if you don't have a stove, if you don't even have a microwave, where can you put this food at? Where can you store it? If you have an RV that people keep telling you, you cannot park there, where are you going to put your food? Where are you going to put your kids? How are you going to keep them safe? We have land trusts, we have welfare, we have other entities and other services that can be provided to everyone, but everyone cannot get to them. Right now, we're in a pandemic. The fact of the matter is, what I do and what I do along with millions of other people that try to do it for each and every person in each city that they live in, is try to connect with everyone. Try to work with GRIP. I work with CORE. They've been helping me a lot, but we don't have anywhere to put everyone somewhere. And when they talk about affordable housing, everyone in here think about every bill you have to count to keep things on. But always remember, you might have something coming to you later on that you can compensate. But the families that we work with, the ones that we're talking about today, the homeless, the near homeless, the ones that will become homeless, the ones that have mental health, the ones that have drug addiction, the ones that have alcohol addictions, the ones that you guys say, that's not me. Well, somebody in your family, because there's too many people out there that have these problems that we see every day that we walk past. So when we say we want to help somebody, understand that we're all trying to do the best that we can. Because if we don't do something, it's going to become bigger and larger and larger. We're trying to find out where to put this safe part. Everybody wants to help, but nobody wants to put in their space. Being homeless is not a crime, and it doesn't make you a criminal. I was a homeless teenager too, and I had to take care of my sister. I grew up becoming a person in this community trying to help those that were like me so they won't have to turn out and go through the steps that I went through. We all have needs. We all have friends. We all have Facebook friends. We all have Instagram. I don't know all the names of all the things that they go through, but we all have people that we can get to. We all have something or someone that we can get services poured into the services that are needed in our city. With those, we need the help. I'm working with a 16 right now that CORE actually helped me get her and her mother into a space. So we all need to ask ourselves and our friends, what can we do to help instead of saying, no, they can't get here. No, they can't stay here. We need services in Richmond. So when we talk about things like that, we need things in West County and we need them now. So as I ask everyone to start turning back on their cameras, just think about those thoughts that you were thinking about when you saw nobody in that screen except your face. And how can you look at everyone and say, it's okay, I want to help, but I'm not going to do anything. Everyone can turn on their cameras. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Sandy. Appreciate it. Thank you for grounding us in this conversation. Now we're gonna get started with open. It's open for everyone. We definitely want to hear from as many people as possible. So yeah, so Marisol, is there a stack or?
No, if anyone would like to raise their hand now, this would be the appropriate time to raise your hand. Thanks, Randy. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. For me, a couple of questions and then a couple of thoughts. My first question is maybe to the people that are here from the county, is why, compared to other cities, does our funding for homelessness go through the county and not funding available for the city directly? For me, that sounds like there's something that doesn't make any sense, especially looking at the reports that I've seen in the homeless issue specifically in Richmond. And I think there needs to be targeted funding for Richmond. So I like an explanation of why that is in the first place, that the money goes to Contra Costa and then we have to funnel it through Contra Costa. And then there's a way so that we can get out of that system and directly fund through Richmond itself. That's one. Two, I think I understand that we have a homeless issue right now and that it's big, but I feel like we also need to pay attention to further down the road when the moratorium on evictions lifts up. And I think people aren't really looking at that because if you didn't have the money now to pay that last month's rent, you're not going to have the money in 6 months to pay 6 months rent. So that's going to be an increase in homelessness, and that's what's going to be another mini crisis. And we have to find a way to do that work now, to figure out how we can help those people before that time comes. Because I figure if we try to get to that point, it'd be too late. You can't help people. You can't help somebody with fire prevention if the house is already on fire. We have to do the steps before. So with this, I think we have to find the steps before we get to that crisis, so we can understand how to attack it. And I think third, I think for especially in Richmond, I think the city has a responsibility. Like I hear there's so many different type of programs, and I'm at the point, I'm gonna be personal. I'm tired of people saying that, oh, I don't want this here. Where I know a majority of the city, they're one lost job from being homeless, or you one missed paycheck away, or one injury away, or one family sickness away from being homeless. So I think as a city, we put too much of a factor on, oh, not in my backyard or not here. There are humans too, and we need to make sure they're protected and they take care of. And the city has an ownership, and we need to come into the city to make sure that we take care of these things. From David's SOS program, I think that should be a city fund program. That should not be a county funded program. For all the work they do in the city, it needs to be a city funded program, and it needs to be funded fully. It needs to be funded every year, because the work they do is amazing, from cleanup and everything. And their services cost less than what it is to have homeless people that take care of them on the street right now. So it's not only cost effective and helping other people, it saves our city in the long run. And I think that's where we need to be focused on. I know me on the task force, those are some of the recommendations I'm going to be making. But I think, one, we need to look into why the funding for homelessness goes to a county, find a way to divert that to the city. To also start the process of help making sure we look ahead for the next crisis, which is when that moratorium expires, and making sure that people have a place to stay and able to afford their rent, because that's going to be and I speak for myself. I'm one lost job or injury, and then I'm screwed. I'm home, and I understand that. And so, like, to have these issues, to make sure that those things are taken care of, because we're not all absolved from that in this city. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I see that the stack is Zolina, Deborah, and Jan, but the county is here and they do want to respond to Randy. So we're gonna give the county, Jamie, a couple of minutes to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be super fast. Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Jeanette. I'm with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services, which is the county homeless program. And you were bringing up great questions. And so one of the part I can speak to right now is around the funding and why funding doesn't go directly to the city. And it's actually because the majority of funding for homelessness comes from the federal government and the state government. And the way that they sort of dump that money into communities is through a homeless continuum of care. And so for our community, that means it goes to the county, but then the county disperses it. So there's, I actually dropped in the chat, there's a page where we're trying to put a lot more information out about funding, and especially during COVID, there have been so many more funding sources and people have a lot of questions. So we're actually putting together a chart right now to really break out for people where the money's coming from and who it's going to, and does it come to the county and what department, and then how does it get out into the community. And I will say, for the most part, cities, except for bigger cities like, you know, Oakland or San Jose, sometimes those cities will get their own allocations of money from the state or the feds because they're really big. But for the most part, cities don't get money. And for in a lot of cases, cities don't actually take on homeless services or addressing homelessness. They usually leave it to the county health department. So Richmond's actually kind of unusual in taking this on individually. And so I think it's something to talk to the city about too, of like, how do you want to use these funds coming in, and does the city want to put their own funds in? Most homeless services are braided from a bunch of different funding sources.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll look in the chat to see more of an explanation. Thank you for your answer.
Great.
Marisol, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Next, it'll be Zolina, Deborah, and then Jan. After that, it'll be Yeri, Robin, Valerie, and Amanda. We are hoping that if you've spoken once, that you allow everybody to speak first before you raise your hand again. So Zolina, you're next.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Zelina, but my laptop like trips out with video. So I'm just gonna go ahead and turn video off. So, and I'm in my bathrobe. But hello everyone, I'm Zelina. I work with Urban Tilth. I'm a Richmond resident. And just regarding, the houseless people issue, it's not, it is an issue. And I've actually hired people from the SOS team to come to my house and actually do work and things like that. When it comes to an overall general spectrum, I think us as residents, we have problems accepting the fact that there's still people at the end of the day. And mental health issue is a huge factor when it comes to things like that. And the city doesn't have that resource anymore. And I think that's also a huge part that we need to.
We lost you, Selena. Okay, we'll go ahead and call on the next one. And then, oh, yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay. But I'm saying just at the end of the day, I think mental health, wellness, and everything like that is a huge factor. And just treating people like people. And that's seems to be a big problem that the city of Richmond has. Just regarding when it comes to the police and residents itself. That's all. I don't know if I cut in or out, I'm not sure.
We heard your last comment. Thank you very much. Do you want to add anything as we move on? Or? Okay, we'll go ahead. Deborah, you're next.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. Both relate to preventing people from becoming unsheltered. I'm curious whether or not there's any place that we have information around how many of the owners of low-income housing utilize some form of federal assistance to buy that housing. Because many housing, whether it's Section 8 or whatever, the owners, whether they're big or small, got some form of federal tax break credit or whatever that support mortgage assistance that allowed them to be able to buy that property. And many of those people are now charging market rents for property that they acquired at a discount. So it seems to me that it would be useful to know how big a universe of property that is in Richmond, and to actually create protections that protect poor people who didn't have access to become property owners from being the casualties of a market somewhat gone wild. So that's my first question. And then the second question has to do with the population.
Before and like combined to make this 6-letter word for a teacher who would usually be older than you.
Hi, can I ask my second question?
Please,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my second question has to do with a population of people in that's almost as large and in some places larger than the population of unsheltered people, but receives very little attention, particularly in the pandemic. And that's seniors who are principal caretakers for young children. Numerically, in California and many other states, there are more people who fall into that category than there are people who are unsheltered. Many of those seniors live in rental housing. They live on a fixed income. They don't receive any kind of government assistance for themselves or the children that they're taking care of. And because they're taking care of younger children, minor children, they're not eligible for senior housing because most senior housing doesn't include minor children. So I'm curious about whether or not, again, we have any idea of how many people fit into that category in Richmond, how many of them are at risk of losing their housing, and are any provisions being made specifically to address that population. There are many states that have created communities, housing communities, specifically for seniors caring for minor children. And it was a great surprise to me to find out that California is not one of those states and doesn't have a single project like that anywhere in the state. So I'll stop with that.
Jan, go ahead, please.
Sure, I just wanted to make sure nobody was going to answer. Couple of things. My name is Jan Mignoni. I'm the president of the North and East Neighborhood Council, which is basically the flatlands around City Hall from San Pablo to 23rd to McDonald.
I'm sorry, does that mean I don't get an answer to my question? I asked two.
I'm not sure.
I think we have that data for Michelle. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if, if we're free flowing in terms of response. I think, Deborah, you brought up two really good points, and if I'm allowed to respond to that, some of this data I don't necessarily have, but I do think that I know that there are funding formulas that are determined by HUD, and also taking a look at our Richmond Housing Authority, where we could pull some of that data and at least find out for tax income credit housing and for subsidized housing, how we could kind of formulate some of that data in response. So what I'd like to do is, make sure that we take down these questions and get it back with the Housing Authority so that we can come back with the total number, because I think you asked a really good question about both of those pieces, and some of that would help be determined. And then for the, I think prevention piece, that's a really important piece as well. So maybe what we could do is have that information so that we can follow up and then share that with the group and everybody who's here on this roundtable, so you all could benefit from it, since the Housing Authority is not here tonight.
Thank you, Michelle.
My turn now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, couple of things. Anyway, I was born and raised in Richmond, and I know the city fairly well. I've been around here for a long time, off and on. One of the things, I don't know how many people know about the Miraflores project, which is in the Park Plaza neighborhood. That's been going on for 10 years now. Senior housing is finally built there, but there's still a whole nother project that needs to happen. As Richmond residents, we have the right to ask, when is this going to happen? Let's move it along. It should not be any kind of financial issue. It should be being built. It's not like, I know Hacienda was financial and all of that. CHDC is working on the old health clinic on 38th and Bissell. They're putting a housing project in there, and they're working that forward. So there's a lot of things happening. We just need to really push continuously with city council, with all these other people. I mean, I'd love to see the city council have, tiny houses in their backyards. I'd like, if you're for it, do it. Don't just talk, do it. I think it's very important to do things. I've already opened my mouth and said, with all the issues about the safe parking, put it on Barrett Avenue. That's in my neighborhood. People can hate me for it, but I think that's the place it should be. The other location that they have over on across from GRIP, the old Arpel auditorium space, it's a open area there. That's a possibility, but there's a lot of intricacies to that. I know the parking lot is empty. you know, you can use it. And so I just think that we really have to push, and I think we have to, NIMBY should not be a word any of us say. I think we all have to take advantage of it. You know, you know, there by the grace of God goes me, you know, and that's what I believe. So we all have to get involved, you know. I know there's probably some people that are living on Rhineland in a RV that aren't from Richmond who, you know, just went there because they knew they could go there. But we need to, those people who are in Richmond, who are Richmond residents who for, you know, whatever reason need our assistance, we need to assist them. And I think that's what we need to go from there. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, sorry, Marisol.
We have Gary, Robin, and then Valerie.
Hi, thank you all for taking the time to provide this information and the space to have this conversation. I really want to follow up on the conversation around funding and really wanting to understand how the county allocates funding to the city. Like, what's that process? Especially, it was mentioned that Richmond is unique in a sense that, you know, we're, you know, a city that's looking to offer additional services for the unhoused versus, or in addition to the services that the county is providing to Richmond. And I think understanding how the funds are allocated and the amounts that goes to each city can maybe help us understand how, you know, maybe we can advocate to get more funding to the city of Richmond so that, you know, the efforts that were mentioned earlier can receive more financial support. Thank you.
This is Jamie again. So I'll just respond real quickly and say, again, great question. So on the, I'll drop it in the link again because there's been a lot of information, but it depends again on the funding source, but for HEAP, for example, which was a state funding, there was a community process. And I'll just flag that the Council on Homelessness is the sort of advisory board to the Board of Supervisors about homelessness, and they actually help influence and make decisions around funding allocations. So I'm going to drop again in the chat like when their meetings are if you're interested in that. But the short answer is it sort of depends on the funding source, but for most of it, there's a public process, and then the Council on Homelessness makes the final decision about how those allocations go, if it's something that's you know, sort of up for discussion. Does that help answer your question?
It does, in a sense. I mean, I guess I understand that, you know, different, you know, sources of funds can be used a certain way, but it doesn't really seem like there's a clear process. Is it based on the number of homeless or unhoused folks in the city? Is it based on the amount of resources it takes to address or offer certain services? So I guess I'm trying to understand, like, just more transparency around how those decisions are made. Is it just really on public input or participation? So, you know, whoever advocates the loudest gets the most funds, because that doesn't really seem like an equitable way to.
Right. Great question. So for this HEAP funding that the city got, it was basically, we looked at the point in time count. So when in the very beginning, Michelle said, you know, we do this annual count where we look to see how many people are experiencing homelessness, and those allocations were done based on like basically what percentage of people experiencing homelessness were in each. We sort of broke it up into West, Central, and East County. So at least for that allocation, that's how it worked. I will say it's super complicated. It can get very complicated, but for that chunk, that's how it was done. And Michelle, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, and I know that the funding piece is a really important part, and you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, for the city's perspective, we want to tell people when these meetings are so that Richmond residents in West County can go and advocate, because really it is an avocation system. It's based upon the HUD count, which we know is not going to count everybody because it's a window of a time where we're going and we're looking at folks who are unsheltered, and we know we don't get everybody. As you can see from the core data, there's way more people that are homeless than that HUD funding formula, but that's what the feds use to do the pass-through funds from the feds to the state to the county. So unfortunately, it's kind of trickled down. And that means that when it's time to kind of allocate how we want to use these resources, the community really has to be informed, so that, like you said, people can go and advocate for the things that we know are important around these kinds of funding decisions. And the city has additionally decided to put in extra dollars because we realize homelessness is a big issue here in the city. And obviously, I think, you know, we'll have to make a decision about what else we can do and doing more. But that's really how we collaborate.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now we have Robin, Valerie, and Amanda.
How's it going, everyone? First and foremost, thank you, everyone who gave their presentations earlier, and for those being here as a community, trying to unpack and unlearn some of our misconceptions around unsheltered folks. I think that's a very big, important step. And my point in coming here and speaking now is, one, to pose a question and then to give a couple statements. The question is just rather simple, and maybe this is more directed toward Jamie. But I do know City of San Pablo, they have a pretty nice visualization of quote unquote a heat map where some of the unsheltered populations are at. And I'm curious if we got something similar to that in Richmond. I think that would also help us identify key areas that we need to target that are responsive to particular folks and particular needs, because sometimes what's happening is, as you're generating these heat maps, you can easily identify why people are centering around a particular location, whether it's because of the waterway or whether it's because there's public restroom access and so forth. The list goes on. And then my couple comments along segueing from that idea of being responsive. You know, there's a lot of ideas being tossed around, a lot of questions being asked, and I think what this really boils down to is we need to really have a robust framework and measurable way of moving forward that is both socially and culturally responsive to unsheltered folks. I mean, I think it's very inappropriate that there are a lot of people here who have never endured that type of lifestyle, but they want to project what they feel is necessary or what is the standard or calibration for what unsheltered folks should live like. That is very inappropriate. And, you know, that is, you know, it's not equivalent, but parallel is like telling someone of Latinx descent how they're supposed to feel in terms of their complicated identity in these spaces. And so I'm throwing that out there because we are dealing with an unprecedented issue of homelessness and unsheltered folks due to the pandemic, but this is not an issue that is brand new. It's just like racism. That's not an issue that's brand new. This has been something that's been churning out for quite some time. And it's starting to get some traction on attention. And it boils down to needing programming that is socially and culturally responsive to the individuals. You know, that said, we have phenomenal programming. Daniel Barth's program, SOS Richmond, come straight to mind. And you know, there's GRIP, there's other organizations outside of Richmond. But you know, I'm giving a personal shout out to SOS because someone had mentioned earlier, maybe we should consider making that city funded. And I wholeheartedly agree, because that is a program that is socially and culturally responsive to the needs of unsheltered folks. And if we could better support that and integrate supportive services around mental health, around healthcare, around well-being, then we're inching closer towards something that make the unsheltered folks feel more visible in their community, because this is their community too. And right now, a lot of questions that I hear outside of here, and not towards anyone in particular in this group, but things that I've seen on social media, it's very exclusionary to unsheltered folks. And that's something that needs to be addressed. That's a whole different tangential piece. And my second statement, this one I promise to be really short, but Again, it goes along with the lines of socially and culturally responsive attitudes. We have access to some of the top experts in these areas of knowing how to deal with these issues. Right down the road, we have some of the best experts in this area at UC Berkeley. Folks at UC Berkeley in the landscape and architecture design program have been working with the city of San Pablo and working with other nearby cities like Oakland to address their issues. Some of the programs that you are mentioning that are happening in San Francisco and Oakland and San Jose, that's because of folks from UC Berkeley interfacing with them because the city has reached out to them. And maybe we should consider that and stop trying to put on this facade that we don't need help, because we do. And that when I say experts, I don't mean individuals who have degrees. I mean individuals who know how to deal with these issues, because we have experts in our own community who don't need degrees. And that just goes again to socially and culturally responsive behaviors, attitude, and actions. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. We just want to remind everyone that we have 5 minutes and we have some new voices that we want to include and get their questions answered. So we're going to have Amanda, Colleen, and Eli go ahead and speak. And then if we have time, we'll allow the other speakers a second chance to chime in. Thank you. Amanda?
Hello, hi you guys. So I've never done this before. My name is Amanda Jenkins. I am an unhoused person in Richmond. I have been unhoused for 5 years approximately in Richmond, and I work very closely with Daniel Barth, SOS, and a few other people on here. Thank you for everything you guys said. You guys have a lot of good insight. My thing that I wanted to say is, there's a big stigmatism on homeless people, that they're these certain types of people, you stereotypes people, which is wrong, you know what I'm saying? And people need to know that, like, the house community needs to realize that we're just normal people trying to live just like them. We just have a lower income bracket, Some of us have bad credit or like me. I came from an abusive relationship and ended up homeless with my son, and eventually ended up in a tent, which was a very humbling experience. Living in a tent on the side of the railroad tracks in the middle of winter as a woman by yourself is something you will never understand until you do it. Is a very humbling experience. You cannot even imagine what it's like until you have lived it. The rainy season is miserable. It is very, very, very bad. When I first became homeless in a tent and I seen how many other people were in tents, I could not believe my eyes. I could not believe what I was seeing. I had lived in Richmond for over 10 years and I had no idea they were there, and they had been there for years. And when I looked around, I told everybody that I met since then, I could never go back into housing and forget what I've seen. I could never forget the people that I've met and the things that I've been through out here. I could never act like this didn't happen. I also am responsible for Richmond's unofficial first safe park on Hensley and Canal. I have 41 trailers over here that I've single-handedly put here, and personally invited these people here to stay here to try to, give us some type of order, to get them off the street, to clean up Richmond streets, to make it safe for people to live. We have approximately 9 children that live here in these 41 trailers. We started off as 3 trailers when I started doing this, and I'm now 41 trailers. This is not even including Ryden. Ryden has about 26 to 32 trailers, I think, also. So, an official safe park in a permanent area for them is a great idea, but 20 to 30 is not going to even put a damper on how many trailers there is. It's not even going to change anything. The way I see it, it's not even going to. It's not going to compare to the problem. You know what I'm saying? We we've been here for approximately 6 months now, at least, and we've gotten a lot of help from SOS and Daniel Barth, but that's about all the help that we've gotten from the community, I guess, as far as money wise and things like that, which Daniel handles. We've gotten help, but we have no porta potties. We don't have any electricity. We don't have any water. We don't have any access to any services here, really at all. I single-handedly come out of my pocket, out of my paycheck from SOS, out of my my welfare, or out of my unemployment or whatever, single-handedly out of my pocket, come up with ways to dump the garbage from here legally, not illegally. You feel me? I pay people to clean up here out of my pocket. I'm just like everyone else here. I'm just an unhoused person that doesn't want to see that wants help, wants to see everyone get help here. That wants to see everyone have somewhere to live that's safe and warm. It's freezing at night. I don't know how many of you guys don't have heaters, but we don't have any out here, and it's freezing. You know what I'm saying? And trying to stay warm is a fire hazard out here. We're constantly starting fires, and we don't mean to, but we are. Just trying to stay warm, and it's crazy that people have to live like this. And we appreciate everything that you guys do every day, and that the fact that we are on your guys' minds, but we haven't seen any type of help really at all, and we need it. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's it. I just wanted to say that for now.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Really appreciate your words and sharing. We do have another couple of new voices that haven't been heard. So I want to ask the facilitators and everybody if we're able to stay on for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's extend.
All right. Let's do it. So Colleen, Eli, Aristo, those will be the next.
You want me to speak next?
You're it.
I got a shitload to say, so I've made some notes, so I'm trying to say as much as possible in a short amount of time. I'm actually going to be 65 this year, and I've been approved to live at the terraces if they ever finish the building, which is pretty critical because my Social Security survivor's benefits, I have a permanent disability that I live with called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. My whole family has it. It can be really debilitating the older you get. I live with chronic intractable pain, the level of pain that a person dying of cancer lives with. I finally started taking pain meds in 2012 when it got bad enough that I was willing to kill myself over it, because I was kind of a clean and sober type person. So it took me a long time to be willing to take meds. But I have an issue with, I know so many people in the disabled community. I've been a long-term disability advocate. I'm the mom who sued Oakland Unified to make them change 25 Oakland public schools to make them architecturally accessible for all disabilities. I filed a class action in the 90s that went it's the biggest case in the country of its kind, and they base all the other cases like it on that case. That just came about because my daughter grew up in wheelchairs and hospitals and stuff like that. But there's a real problem with physically disabled people that are not seniors, because everybody's trying to live on SSI, which is about $9.25 a month, and you can't even rent a room for that, let alone feed yourself. And it's a lot of young people. I mean, my grandkids have this disease, and luckily they have parents that are doing pretty good, like my son-in-law's a scientist and stuff, but there's a lot of people that I know that don't have that option. They don't have family support. They don't have, you know what I mean? Like if you have cancer when you're a kid and you don't have a family to support you, and you grow up into the SSI system, you literally cannot afford to live. And how do you live in a tent when you have a physical chronic condition? I've known homeless people that have colorectal cancer dragging around a suitcase full of canned food. You know what I mean? Like wearing Depends and stuff, so I'm just trying to touch on that. So there's that issue. I was a foster kid, I was an abused kid, so I was in that system, even though my family was rich, but I had to divorce myself from my family. I'm very concerned about LBGT youth because a lot of them end up homeless. A lot of foster kids end up homeless. We need, they call them TAY youth, transitional youth, that are transitioning out of the foster care system. Those are the most likely youngsters likely to end up homeless. Let's see what else. Seniors, seniors are broke. I mean, what I live on doesn't even cover my rent where I live right now. I'm only living because we got those stimulus checks and because I have some really nice friends and I do a lot of great, nice things for my people in my life and neighbors and whatever. So people help me like all the time because I've always helped others and it comes back. But I'm one of the lucky ones, right? I mean, I know how to use my brain and what I've learned in my life, but there's a lot of people that maybe don't have some of the same advantages that I've grown up with, with my smarts or my whatever. You know what I mean? Like everybody's struggling. What else? I'm concerned about like this homeless thing, like water, electricity. People can't charge their phones. Solar, like getting money for these people to have solar so people can charge their phones so they can work, so they can connect with even services, right? Because I know a lot of unhoused people, it's like, how do you charge your phone? And like Amanda said, how do you stay warm? That's the biggest reason there's fires in the encampments is because people are freaking cold. Let's see what else. There's a lot of arguing going on about the safe parking program because I'm on Nextdoor too. And I keep trying to talk to people on Nextdoor and, talk to them about why people are homeless and, like all that stuff. And they're all arguing about it, like not in my neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. So that's going on, where people are kind of pointing fingers and criminalizing and assuming everybody's just a bunch of crazy alcoholic drug addicts, and I'm like, trauma is the gateway drug. Sorry, that's the gateway drug. Trauma, child abuse, child neglect, poverty, homophobia. Let's see what else. And to answer the lady's question about Section 8, Section 8 basically pays landlords like you rent to a Section 8 qualified person and you get reimbursed by the government to help cover your rent. It's not that they are buying property for these landlords. That's not how the system works. Section 8 basically pays landlords to rent to a lower income person who qualifies for Section 8 and reimburses them for the difference in what they pay. Does that make sense? So that's the deal with that. They're not buying them houses. That's not what's happening. I've been a landlord, I know that one. Let's see what else. Did I cover anything? Oh, another thing I'm curious about, I guess it's one of the few questions I have is that I know there's an Oakland Community Land Trust. Like I have a friend, she and her husband ended up being able to buy a house through the Oakland Community Land Trust. Do we have that in Richmond? And are they doing that? Like they were buying up like foreclosures or sorry, I swear a lot, messed up houses, rehabbing them, fitting them with solar, new appliances, whatever, and then selling them to lower income people so that people were able to become homeowners. I mean, so I'm curious if we have anything like that in Contra Costa County, because I lived many years in Alameda County, so I know that county better. And I've only been in Richmond for like 4 years or so. So I'm still getting to know Richmond. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah,
I was trying to cover a lot of territory.
Yeah, and maybe Valerie can respond real quickly to the land trust, and then we can, we are over time, so we definitely want to wrap the meeting up, but definitely allow new voices to speak. So Valerie, do you want to respond really quickly?
Yeah, and that's actually why I raised my hand earlier, was to respond initially to Randy's question, and I think it snowballed over time. But just to be really quick to respond to that last comment, is Richmond land is essentially in in its formation of becoming what Oak CLT is now. And so Oakland Community Land Trust history is that they were started during the foreclosure crisis. And we're in a moment with the pandemic and the eventual economic downturn where we're in the same crisis now. And so that urgency that people on this call have expressed is really essential to thinking about increasing models for neighborhood, stabilization and preservation of affordable housing across the spectrum. And so I alluded to some of that in my comments, but I'd be happy to touch base with anybody in greater detail about it. I had a lot of comments I wanted to respond to Deborah about because and that's what I alluded to, the affordable housing system is broken. Affordable housing in the form of public housing is being rapidly defunded at a federal level. So there's a lot that's being sold and converted. There are private entities now doing affordable housing because it's financed through tax credits, which is really for monetization. And so that's why it's taking years to build affordable housing because the unit cost of affordable housing is being maximized. And similarly, yes, people who are taking project-based vouchers, who are taking Section 8 vouchers, that is, they're essentially able to get market rate. So they are able to be compensated for those vouchers. And that's where there's like a profit motive in some spaces where affordable housing development is happening. And so there is a responsibility to create different forms of affordable housing that are not just dependent on public subsidy, because that's where we're seeing there's a lot of strain. When we talked about city resources, we talked about county resources. And so I'd be happy to talk in greater detail about that because that's where, small site developments, when we're talking about different models for funding it. And just to return to the foreclosure piece, because that's a huge looming concern. More information on our social media about an example of we have to create the conditions for these alternatives to thrive. And so there was a Senate bill brought forth by Nancy Skinner that went into implementation this year. So in January, SB 1079, Homes for Homeowners, Not Corporations. And it's trying to offer a first look to tenants, whether they're renters or people losing or at risk of defaulting on their mortgage, or affordable housing development groups like Community Land Trust, to be able to acquire those properties before they go to auction, which is really critical because we have a huge issue with private investment groups owning property, because real estate is an attractive kind of real estate, it's an attractive investment scheme that we have to actively combat. I couldn't speak to any of this, but I know the theme is around reimagining public safety, and that does require decriminalizing homelessness. And so I know just wanting to lift up Reimagine Richmond's work around calling out Caltrans, folks who have been in the encampments in Caltrans, and there being tickets and there being criminalization of those folks. There has to be an effort for those who represent, who have a title, who have power that they can leverage, of talking to these quasi-public entities to make sure that we are shifting away from those practices and making sure that folks can have dignity and be in solidarity. For those on here, I know we're talking a lot about what the city and county can do. Cannot stress enough to fund organizing. I just did it right now. I donated to SOS Richmond. I know it's sometimes I highly encourage, that's a tangible thing we can accomplish at the end of this call for the remaining folks that are on here, is recognizing that we have to be in solidarity. We have to work side by side with unhoused folks, because that can be any one person on this call, as we've already heard and lifted up. We can't keep having this intellectual, theoretical conversation. We really got to be in the work in the ways that we can. And I know it's hard because of COVID, but being in solidarity is funding the work if we're not doing it ourselves, or being out in the paint if we can, or thinking about direct action as a more viable solution, because the time necessitates that. I have a lot more to say, but I'll end it there because I know that was too much, but thank you.
No, that was perfect, Valerie, and a great way to move us into wrapping it up. This is not the first or the last, time we're going to come together as a community to talk about how we can help on the ground, and then also think about short-term and long-term solutions to this issue. And Luis, thank you for pulling this up. There's vacancies on the board, on the rent board, and there's currently no renters on the rent board, so it's important to have a renter there that can really advocate for people who know what it's like to be a renter and have your landowner trying to evict you or raise the rent, etc. And also attend the homeless task force meetings. That's where you will find groups like SOS and other passionate leaders in the community who are working towards solutions, both short-term and long-term. And ACE, I know I heard about if we don't do something now, in the near future, we might have another wave of homelessness due to COVID and the relief programs. And so ACE is doing a lot of work around that. They just introduced something to City Council last Tuesday around getting stronger renter protections. And so definitely, stay up to date with what ACE is doing and get involved with ACE. They do a lot of community organizing on the ground around rents being increased and evictions, and also policy to make sure that renters have more protections. And then I put legal aid because they offer legal services at a discounted price or for free, because I know sometimes that's a barrier, right? Like paying for lawyers to protect you. And so those are some of the resources. And as mentioned, that Valerie said, definitely donate to SOS and volunteer as immediate ways, that things we can do in the now. And I just want to really thank all of our speakers, Valerie and Michelle and Daniel. And I want to thank Marisol. And I want to thank all the speakers for being here tonight. This is one of many conversations. And yeah, we're in this together, strength in numbers. The more we can work collaboratively and together, the further we're gonna get, right? We need multiple solutions working at once in collaboration with one another. So if anyone has anything else to say, I think we may end it there. Joanne, is there any logistical things you wanna share, or should we?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here, everyone for staying, everyone for being open-minded and sharing the space with humility. And again, I appreciate all of our speakers, every single one. And if perhaps our staff and facilitators could stay on for just a few more minutes to do some final check-ins, then other than that, I have nothing left for the good of the order.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
I continue.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Johan. I dig it in very much.
Good job, people. You guys did a great job facilitating, organizing, keeping it together. Thank you, Michelle. It's always a pleasure to see you. And thank you, Miss Dandy. It's always great to hear from you too.
Thank you. I'll call you. I missed something.
Oh, okay. No worries.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.